The Torah describes the level of Avraham's chesed as he hosted the angels who came in human form, how he ran towards them, how he prostrated himself, how he had asked them to accept his hospitality, and how he offered the shade of his tree, because it was the hottest day in existence, to shield them from the heat. He offered water for them to wash their feet. And he says, have some bread. And they agreed. Avraham was ecstatic immediately. He hurried with all the preparations. So we mentioned many times, the Gemara, the Midrash tells us, in the merit of every aspect of Avraham's hospitality, we merited eternal value. The shade of the tree we merited for 40 years. We were protected by the clouds of glory. In the merit of the bread, we merited the manna for 40 years. This miracle food fell every day. We were in a location which was humanly impossible to survive. Hashem provided the manna, the man, which spiritualized us because of the bread that he offered. We had the wellspring of Miriam in the merit of the water which he had offered to the guests to wash their feet. And the Midrash tells us that whatever Avraham did himself came directly from Hashem. Anything that he delegated through an intermediary, we received through an intermediary. The shade of the tree, Avraham offered himself. Continuously, Hashem provided the clouds of glory to provide whatever physical protection, spiritual insulation from the world. In the merit of the bread, Avraham offered himself every day. In the morning, they would find the man enough to provide for each family, each individual. There was never excess, there was never lacking. However, the water, because it was offered through an intermediary, so the water came about through intermediary. When we needed water, Moshe Rabbeinu was told to take his staff, the first time to strike the rock. The second time, in the 40th year when Miriam passed away and it ceased flowing, he was told to speak to the rock. And the Jews, because they asked, not in a respectful manner, he became upset with them and he struck the rock. And because he struck the rock rather than speaking to the rock, Moshe and Aaron did not merit to go into Eretz Yisrael for that reason. So the water came through an intermediary. It did not come like the clouds of glory in the manna. Why? Because Avraham, when he provided his hospitality, the water came through an intermediary. So seemingly, if it would have come directly from Avraham, Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't have had the context to strike the rock, because the water would naturally flowed, as everything else came natural. So we see, and yet Avraham is not held accountable for not providing the water himself. It's just, as we said, measure for measure. As you do it, God repays measure for measure. You do it yourself, he does it himself. You do it through an intermediary, he does it through an intermediary. But we see the ramifications of the intermediary, because Moshe had to do it, had to extract the water, therefore ultimately came to the striking of the rock. But the question is, if Avraham did everything himself personally, why did he not offer the water himself personally? That's the question. So what we explained was that, as the Gemara tells us, that he suspected that they were idol worshippers, and the dust that they had on their feet was the dust that they worshipped. Because the Arabs, they worshipped the dust of the earth. And he didn't want that the idolatry should be tracked into his home. See, therefore, he offered the water, they should wash their feet. So the dust, if it's idolatrous dust, it will not be brought into his home. But again, why did he offer the water himself? So what he explained was that the Avraham Avinu, idolatry, was seen in a context which was so detestable and so intolerable, because Avraham's whole objective was to eradicate idolatry, to bring truth to the world, and therefore was something he couldn't tolerate. He did not want to have any level of association with it. As a result of that, to disassociate himself at every level, he delegated the water through a third party. He didn't want to engage with the person directly who had the idolatrous dust on his feet. That's why it was delegated through a third party, and he did not do it himself. He saw it as an abomination. It's something which to him was intolerable, and therefore he couldn't be associated with it. I'll give you an example. You love your father more than anything in the world. Your father has done for you things which are unimaginable, and therefore you have a sense and a feeling of beholdenness to your father, and you revere your father because he's special and what he's provided and what he still provides. And somebody goes and publicly embarrasses your father, slanders him, character assassination at the worst level. Because of that person's relationship with his father, when he sees this person and the person wants to approach him, could he have any interest to have any level of association with this man because of what he's done? How he's disgraced and embarrassed and brought pain on his father. He wants nothing to do with the man. Let's say this man is starving. The person who originally had slandered and hurt his father, who he loves more than anything. So he feels he can't be cruel. But directly to give him bread in his mouth or in his hand, he wants nothing to do with the man. Because the man, what he's done and what he represents is everything that he doesn't want to be associated with. So what does he do? He feels he has to provide the bread for the person. He's not going to let him starve to death. But what does he do? Gives it to a third party. Here's the bread, feed him outside. I don't want to look at him. I want to be associated. I want nothing to do with the man. Minimally, that's exactly what Avram's relationship was with Hashem. And therefore, idolatry was so detestable and so intolerable and such an abomination, he wanted nothing to do with it. Therefore, he delegated it through a third party. He did not offer the water himself because he suspected maybe the dust on their feet was idolatrous dust for that reason. That's how we explained it. Now, I mentioned there's one opinion in the Gemara that the reason why we went to Egypt was because Avraham seemingly missed an opportunity. What was the opportunity he missed? After he defeated the 4 kings and he was the victor, and the spoils of war was the nation of Sodom. So he had the people, the subjects of Sodom, and he had all the spoils, the booty of Sodom. This king of Sodom approaches Avraham, who's the victor, and he says, let me have the people, you take the material. That's, you can imagine the level of arrogance. You're a captive. I am the victor, you're my captive. You're my chattel now. And you're going to dictate terms to the victor. Give me the people, you take the spoils. What's Avram's reaction to this? I will not take as much as a thread. I will not take a bootstrap from you. Because there's, under no circumstances, could it ever be said that you made me wealthy. Therefore, I want nothing to do with you. Because what you are, you epitomize and personify evil. I want nothing to do with you. And so the king of Sodom, he took the people, he took all his material, went back to Sodom. Hashem says to Avraham, You had an opportunity to take the members of the subject of Sodom and convert them to monotheism. You missed the opportunity. And you missed the opportunity to the point that ultimately they were destroyed by cosmic destruction. So all those people who you could have converted to monotheism, because you had the upper hand, why did you pass on the opportunity? How did you not say, I want the people? And been stern and put your foot down? Because you did not bring them under the wings of the divine presence, your children will be slaves in a land which is not theirs. They'll be afflicted. And ultimately, we became idolaters, we became pagans in Egypt. But the question is, Avram's whole thrust of his life was converting pagans to monotheism. How did he miss this one? It's seemingly, it's a shoo-in. You have the upper hand, you're the victor. Of course you should take them. But the king so says, no, you give me the people, you take the material. Spoils, Avram says, I want nothing. I'm not even a thread of bootstrap. But why? Why did he miss the point? Or as we say, why did he miss the boat here? And because of that, we spent 210 years in Egypt. Because of that, we were idolaters. And because of that idolatry, ultimately, we succumbed to the Chet Egel. Because of that. But if Avram wouldn't have missed the point, all that wouldn't have happened. Why did he have this blind spot? That's the question. So the way I understand it is, it's similar to the water associated with the idolatrous dust. The king of Sodom was such an evil man. Sodom represented the most extreme level of evil in existence. When this man comes to him, dripping with arrogance and insolence and brazenness, there's no word that you could describe this man. And he's dictating to Avram, give me the people, you take the material spoils. Avram, when he looked at this man, he wants nothing to do with this man. He was totally blocked. All he saw was evil. And as a result of that, the members of the community were occluded, and therefore he missed the opportunity. Although Avram, with the idolatry, he should have offered the water himself, but it's because of his relationship with idolatry, it was intolerable. It was detestable. He wants nothing to do with it. I want nothing to do with this man and what's associated with this man. So the positive, the magnified positive, turned out to be a negative for him. That's the reason why he rejected him. So of course, the forefront of his mind was always converting pagans to monotheism. But in this context, it was blocked from his mind because he was so deeply touched negatively by this experience. All he saw was was this evil. I want nothing to do with this evil. You know, there's an expression, you don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. Here, because he wanted nothing to do with Sodom, he just rejected everything. And that was the cause of them turning to a level of evil, evolving to a level of evil, that they had to be removed from the face of the earth. And that's why I said, when Avram retracted and he heard what God said to him, he was going to leave no stone unturned to try to correct his oversight. And that's why he pleaded so strongly with Hashem. Maybe the 50 tzaddikim, 45, 40, 30, 20, there was nothing. He understood that was the last nail in his coffin. There's no annulment of that decree. There's no way to retract that decree. The Jews are going to Egypt, are going to be slaves. Where do we find something similar again? Moshe Rabbeinu was sent to Egypt to be the Redeemer. Initially, he had to flee from Egypt. Why? Because he was a fugitive. Moshe Rabbeinu was the most beloved person in Egypt. He was the adopted grandson of Pharaoh. He was the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. And Paro loved him. If you read the Midrash, the way he loved him tremendously. At the age of 18, Moshe knows he's a Jew. His stepmother converted to monotheism. He was under the influence of his parents, Miriam, Yocheved, and Amram. And he wants to see how his brothers are faring. He goes to see, and he sees an Egyptian beating a Jewish man, beating him to death. He sees this, and Moshe Rabbeinu at that time was divinely inspired already. And he understands exactly why he's beating him. What happened? He was one of the taskmasters of Egypt, and he had his eye on this woman. He was sexually attracted to her. He went into his home at night, woke him up, and sent him out into the field to do work. Under the cover of darkness, he comes back. This taskmaster goes into the tent, and the woman thinks it's her husband, and this Egyptian man cohabits with this man's wife, with the Jew's wife. And she thinks at the time it's her husband. Only later, when the husband came back, he realized what happened. The next day, this taskmaster Egyptian sees this Jew, and he realizes the Jew understands what happened. So due to his level of guilt, he started to beat the Jew to death. He commits adultery with his wife, and now that his game is up, he doesn't need this Jew looking at him with this negative eye. He beats him to death, tries to beat him to death. Moshe sees this. He immediately kills the Egyptian and buries him in the sand. He believed that nobody witnessed this act. There were two Jews who had witnessed it, who were aware of it. Next day, he goes out to see how his brothers are faring again. These two Jews are fighting with one another. One Jew's name is Doson, and the other one's name is Avraham. And they're having a quarrel. Comes to a point, one lifts his hand and is about to strike the other one. That's how intense this argument is. Moshe Rabbeinu says to them, Rosho lo mesakes re'echo, evil one, why are you smiting your brother? These people were the grandchildren of Reuven. They saw themselves a pedigree. They were very wealthy. There was a wealthy class among the slave class. They had certain connections in the Egyptian government. And they say to Moshe with disdain, since when are you a judge to judge us? Are you going to kill us the way you killed the Egyptian? So when they made that comment, immediately he knew his game is up. He realized that they're going to inform on him that he killed the Egyptian. And he did. And because they had such wealth, and they had those relationships in the upper echelons of the government, they were able to get the word through that the adopted prince, the Jew, killed an Egyptian taskmaster. Moshe miraculously fled Egypt. It was a miracle that he was able to flee. God performed miracles that he was able to flee. He came before the Egyptian court. They ruled him that he should be decapitated. And all the members of the court became blind, deaf and dumb. Moshe was able to escape. According to one midrash, they tried to decapitate him. It didn't work. He fled. At the age of 80, he's told at the burning bush, it's time to come back. Comes back. Could you imagine? Since that time that he was informed on these two Jews who are evil people, they had financial reversals, and therefore they didn't have the connections to the government any longer. So therefore, they couldn't actually ruffle Moshe's feathers any longer. He comes back, performs the miracles, he proves that he's God's agent, proves to the Jewish people that he's the Redeemer. And they believe. Could you imagine these two characters? They're seething with envy. This young whippersnapper that we tried to eliminate years earlier, he's back with the greatest level of glory, with power. And they could not tolerate him. They were the antagonists of Moshe, these two, Dosan of Avraham. What happens? When Moshe comes and proves to them through miracles that he's the Redeemer, all of a sudden there's a work stoppage. A work stoppage. Jews stop. We're not working anymore. They're slaves. Pharaoh gives a decree. Until now, we supplied straw to make the bricks. And there was a quota, each Jew had to produce so many bricks. From now on, we withdraw the straw subsidy. They have to provide the same amount of bricks, but they have to gather their own straw. Because Pharaoh had said the reason why you have this undercurrent of rebellion, they have too much time on their hands to think. But if they're going to be busy just surviving, because otherwise they're going to be beaten. If they don't meet the quotas, you'll see all the complaints are going to disappear. It'll quell any uprising. And sure enough, it worked. Dosan Avraham was one of the leaders of the slave class because they had a pedigree, because initially they're wealthy, and they come to Pharaoh and said, what are you doing to us? Don't you realize we're not going to survive unless you provide the straw? So Pharaoh says, don't you realize the only reason why you're fomenting a rebellion is because you have too much time on your hands to think. You're lazy. Now that you have to gather your own straw and produce the same quota of bricks, you'll be dedicated slaves. I'm not going to have a problem with you people. And he dismissed them. As they're coming out of the palace, Dosan Avraham and whoever they was with them, who do they meet coming in? Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron, the two agents of God who are going to lead the redemption. Dosan Avraham say to Pharaoh, before you came, we didn't have problems. Since you've come, we have terrible problems. You've actually put us in a position that we've become putrid in the eyes of the Egyptian king. Let God judge you for what you did to us. This is how directly the accusation was to Moshe and Aaron. You know what this is? This is like a dagger into Moshe's heart. By who? By his arch enemy, the ultimate antagonist. Originally, they had to flee and be in Midian for all those years because they informed on him. You know what happens? This kind of comment is a level of Chil Hashem is not to be believed. Here he's coming as God's agent. He proved he's God's agent. And he's accused. You've made us putrid in the eyes of Pharaoh. Let God judge between you and us. You know what level of arrogance this is? And look who it's coming from. Moshe immediately has to rectify this. He goes out and he says to God, why did you bring such harm upon the people? That's what he asks Hashem. Instead of things getting better, they've gotten worse. That's the question Moshe asks God. God says, in simple terms, it's none of your business. That's the process. So he says, if you're not willing to explain it to me, you shouldn't have chosen me to be your agent. That's Moshe's retort. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was so pained by the Chil Hashem of these two monsters who made this accusation, he's speaking out of turn. And he did speak out of turn. God says, because he spoke out of turn, now you will see the redemption from Egypt. But the entry of the Jews into the promised land, you're not going to be there. You're going to pass away before. Because he spoke out of turn. That why did Moshe speak out of turn? He spoke out of turn because to the degree that he internalized the pain of the Chil Hashem, that these two Jews who were in a leadership position could speak about God, where he was proven that he was God's agent to be the Redeemer, All he saw was red, Moshe Rabbeinu. He was enraged. But when you're in an enraged state, you don't think rationally. And therefore he spoke so strongly to God. But it's inappropriate. So what activated the inappropriate, the insensitive response? Because these people represented something which was so evil and so negative, that was his reaction. Avraham, idolatry to him was taboo beyond taboo, detestable. Delegates it through a third party. The king of Sodom, Avraham, his whole life is converting people to monotheism. Here he has an opportunity to convert a whole nation. But when the king of Sodom, who represents evil, says, give me the people, you take the spoils, the booty. When he sees the king of Sodom, which epitomizes evil, which he cannot tolerate, this level of evil, all he sees is red. Converting people are not within his purview at this moment. I want nothing to do with you. And that's why he missed the opportunity. So every one of these situations, it was due to his level of internalization of God. Therefore, these all were intolerable situations. And as a result of that, they reacted. And the reaction brought about, he did not offer the water himself. Not that it was a claim against him, but factually, it manifests itself that the water had come to an intermediary. And ultimately, Moshe struck the rock instead of speaking to the rock. It manifests itself that Avraham did not take the subjects of Sodom and convert them to monotheism, which led to the bondage. And thirdly, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't merit to go into the land is because he spoke out of turn, because he was confronted with these two evil people who are the informers, who even accused him of creating a Chil Hashem, that God made it worse rather than making it better. So sometimes the upside, you're walking on a tightrope. When you're way up there, you fall from 5 feet, the injury is not too bad. You fall from the 1,000th story, you got to walk real careful, especially when you walk on a tightrope up there. Moshe Rabbeinu was so special way up there. His level of sensitivity was so acute. The slightest thing sets him off to a level, because when it comes to Chil Hashem, there's no way he could tolerate it. Avraham saw idolatry as the ultimate, negative. The king of Sodom, personification of evil, all he saw was evil. Evil want nothing to do with evil. And therefore he glossed over the subjects, and the kiruv concept, converting them to monotheism, was totally blotted out of his mind.